Imagine you have spent your entire life in a world that is warm. Not comfortable warm, equatorial Africa warm. The kind of heat that you feel before sunrise, that never fully leaves at night, that shapes every instinct you have ever developed about what the world is supposed to feel like. You know rain, you know dust, you know the dry season and the wet season. You know heat that shimmers off the ground in waves you can see. You do not know cold, not real cold, not the kind of cold that turns water into something you can hold in your hand. Now walk north, walk for generations, follow the herds, follow the green corridors that opened up through the Arabian Peninsula during warmer climate windows between 50,000 and 60,000 years ago. Keep walking as the landscape changes, as the trees grow shorter and further apart, as the nights get longer and the air starts to feel different in your lungs. And then, one morning you wake up and the world has gone white. No one recorded this moment. No cave painting has been definitively identified as depicting snow. No ancient text describes the first encounter because writing wouldn't exist for another 45,000 years. But we know it happened because we are here. And getting here required crossing climates that our species had never experienced before. So what happened in that moment? The honest answer is that we don't know exactly, but we know a great deal about how the human brain responds to genuinely novel stimuli, and we know a great deal about the environment and cognitive capabilities of the people who made that journey. And what those two things suggest together is far more interesting than a simple story of shock and confusion. The first thing to understand is that by the time Homo sapiens began their major migration out of Africa, in waves that researchers now place between roughly 106,000 and 45,000 years ago, they were not cognitively simple creatures stumbling through the world on instinct. They were us, the same brain, the same capacity for language, planning, abstract thought, and pattern recognition that you are using right now to process this video. These were people who already understood that the world changed. They tracked seasonal patterns. They read animal behavior as environmental signals. They had mental frameworks for classifying the unfamiliar, for asking, what is this and what does it mean for my survival? Snow, then, would not have simply caused blank incomprehension. It would have triggered something more specific, a cascade of classification attempts. The brain searching its existing categories for something that fit, and finding nothing that quite did. It is cold like deep shade, but it is solid. It is white like bone, but it falls from the sky. It melts when you hold it. It covers the ground, but it is not soil. Nothing in a lifetime of African savanna experience provides the right category for what snow actually is. Researchers who study encounters with genuinely novel stimuli, things that fall completely outside a person's existing knowledge base, find a fairly consistent pattern. The first response is usually not fear. It is a kind of arrested attention. The brain essentially pauses its normal processing to dedicate resources to this new input. Then comes an evaluation: dangerous or not dangerous, useful or not useful, known or unknown. Snow, experienced for the first time, probably read as deeply ambiguous. It wasn't obviously alive. It wasn't aggressive, but it was everywhere. It was cold in a way that felt genuinely threatening to a body built for tropical temperatures. And it had replaced the ground, which was one of the most stable features of the world these people knew. The cold itself would have been the most urgent signal. Modern research on cold exposure shows that the human body responds to significant temperature drops with a stress response, the same basic physiological alarm system that activates in response to threats: cortisol, elevated heart rate, heightened alertness. For someone who had never experienced temperatures near freezing, that first exposure would have felt physiologically indistinguishable from danger, even before the brain had finished deciding whether it actually was. And then came the question that only a human brain can ask: where did it come from? Hunter-gatherer cognition is deeply oriented toward causal explanation. People in small-scale societies do not simply observe phenomena, they explain them. The sky made it, the ground produced it. Something above is responsible. Researchers studying animist belief systems across diverse cultures have found that the tendency to attribute unfamiliar natural events to intentional agents, to assume something caused this on purpose, appears to be cross-cultural and deeply embedded. It is, some cognitive scientists argue, one of the oldest features of human thought. Snow falling from a sky that looked like any other sky would almost certainly have been interpreted through this lens, not as a weather system, but as an act. Something was doing this. Something had changed the world overnight. What is remarkable is not that early humans were frightened or confused by snow. What is remarkable is what they did next. They stayed. They adapted. They figured out that the white ground still had food beneath it, that the strange falling substance could be read as a signal about where animals went to shelter, that the cold itself could be survived if you moved differently, dressed differently, built differently. Within relatively short evolutionary time, the descendants of people who had never seen snow were hunting reindeer across frozen tundra, carving shelters into permafrost, and reading ice patterns the way their ancestors read savanna grass. The first encounter with snow was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of one of the most remarkable cognitive and behavioral adaptations in the history of our species. The moment human beings began to understand that the world was far larger and stranger than Africa had ever suggested, and that they could survive in it anyway. We do not know the name of the first human who touched snow. We do not know what they said, or whether they ran, or whether they stood very still and stared. But they did not turn back. And every person alive today is descended from someone who made the same choice.